Hello and welcome to this webinar, Introduction to FMX Linux, Delphi's FireMonkey for Linux solution. This is a webinar, so I'm going to talk and you're going to listen, but if you do have any questions, feel free to put them in the question panel there on the right if you're attending the live session, and there will be time at the end where we will answer your questions for you in a live Q&A session. My name is Jim McKeeth. I'm the Chief Developer Advocate and Engineer for Embarcadero Technologies, longtime Delphi developer, developed lots of languages, all-around geek, love playing with technology. I'm probably not a Linux expert. I've used Linux off and on over the years and have done a little bit with FMX Linux, so there may be some parts of this that I'm not able to dive into completely in-depth understanding, but hopefully provide you enough information that you can get started and be successful using FMX Linux. For our agenda, we're going to do a little bit of overview and history. Then I'm going to talk to you about the installation, how to get started with using FMX Linux, and then some basics usage. We're going to talk about different UI elements, look at the samples that are included, and touch on the fact that you can use all the existing stuff you already use, like FireDAC, RTL, etc., just like you did with the Delphi for Linux support for server-side development. Also, if you do have existing VCL applications on Windows, you can use MITA converter to convert those to FireMonkey before using FMX Linux. Lastly, we're going to touch on third-party support and the Broadway server that allows you to run a FireMonkey application in the browser. Hopefully, you have a reason why you would want to use FMX on Linux, and that's why you're on this webinar today. But just in case you don't, here's a few things you might consider as far as reasons to add FMX for Linux, or FMX Linux to your tool belt. Previously, the Delphi support for Linux was for server-side development, but with FMX Linux, it brings all of the flexibility and power of FireMonkey to the Linux desktop. This is great for education, or especially, I think, point of sale or kiosks where you have a dedicated single-purpose computer with a lockdown user experience. Where you just want it to do one thing, this would be a great solution for FireMonkey. If you're in a situation where you need the more customizable options for security, that's another option. You might use Linux. A number of government agencies have standardized on Linux, so by supporting Linux, you're able to support those government agencies. And in industrial automation situations where people have done integrated systems or Internet of Things solutions, sometimes they want to have a Linux user interface to control all of that. And of course, last but not least, choice. You can do it now, so you might as well figure it out. First, a little history. Back in '99 is when Kylix, or Delphi for Linux, was first introduced. It was a full port of the IDE to Linux, used what's called Clix, which was based on Trolltech's Qt widget library. And it only supported 32-bit x86 Linux. Kylix 3 was the last updated version of Linux that was released in 2002, and since then there hasn't been any updates to Linux support with Delphi. In 2017, Tokyo introduced Delphi for x86 64-bit Linux. So this was an upgrade in 64-bit now, with plus all the great new features that have evolved in the Delphi language since then. The thing that's different now is the IDE runs on Windows, and then you cross-compile to Linux via PAServer. So PAServer runs on the Linux computer, and you compile on Windows, and then you can deploy through the PAServer and debug through the PAServer. It was released with only support for server-side development for like web servers, server modules, console applications, stuff like that. That was kind of what we saw as the primary use of Linux. There was no desktop widget GUI library. Also, shortly after it was released, Eugene of KSDev released FMX Linux, which was a modification to FireMonkey to add support to Linux. Eugene was one of the original architects of FireMonkey at Embarcadero, went on to form his own company, KSDev, where he developed FMX Linux. In 2019, just a couple weeks ago, Embarcadero, we included FMX Linux with Delphi 10.3.1, I should say 10.3.1, Rio. If you have a date subscription, then you can receive FMX Linux. So when you install FMX Linux, it modifies some of the FireMonkey files to make them compatible with Linux. So it includes some new libraries and then some modifications to the existing FireMonkey libraries. It still uses the Delphi compiler for x86 64-bit Linux that was built into the IDE since Tokyo. So it does not support ARM Linux like the Raspberry Pi. IDE still runs on Windows and then connects to Linux via PAServer. You use the same frameworks and components that you use on Windows, macOS, Android, and iOS. So essentially, if you can do it on one of those platforms, you can now do it on Linux. There's a few exceptions. Like a lot of the devices, camera support, things like that, sensors that are specific to mobile devices. But as far as using RTL, the runtime library, FireDAC, live bindings, or any other Delphi library, they should work on Linux. So it's included, like I said, in 10.3.1 Rio and newer if you have update subscription. And there's a link there that tells you more about FireMonkey for Linux. So a question that I'm expecting to receive is, what's the difference between FMX Linux and CrossVCL? Or what if I have a VCL application I want to move to Linux? So KSDev also makes CrossVCL. It's another product of theirs, which allows for VCL on Linux and Mac OS. Embarcadero decided to include FMX Linux with Delphi and Rad Studio 10.3+. Why did we decide that? Well, it really comes down to Linux, or FireMonkey is the cross-platform solution. It's the one that's designed for cross-platform, and we felt it made more sense to use that as our Linux offering. Now, you still have the choice. You can go out and get CrossVCL on your own if you want to and use that instead, or you can use FMX Linux. The choice is yours. If you do have an existing VCL application, though, and you want to bring it to Linux, check out MITA Converter and convert it to FireMonkey first, and then you can convert it to FireMonkey for Linux. So to install FMX for Linux, it's available via GetIt. Just go into Delphi or Rad Studio. It doesn't work with C++ Builder. There's no C++ compiler for Linux yet. Supported platforms, as far as target platforms, it must be x86 64-bit Linux desktop. Now, if the Linux systems you're working with are server installations, so for example, they have no desktop, no user interface, just console, you can't deploy an FMX Linux application to that. I mean, you could, but you couldn't run it because there's no windowing system. Now, someone's probably going to prove me wrong and figure out a way to do that. That's fine, but the point is, you're going to want to have a Linux desktop installed to deploy this to. Officially, the platforms that are supported are Ubuntu 18 LTS, 16 LTS, and 14 LTS, and Red Hat Enterprise Linux 7. There's the pages where you can go to check out to find out more information what platforms are supported. Unofficially, I've talked to a number of people, pretty much any Linux platform, any modern Linux platform, if you install the right packages in the right places, you can get it to work. So there's a link there to a forum post for FMX Linux that shows 134 different Linux distros that FMX Linux works on. There were 4 that it didn't work. One of those being, I've heard of Knoppix, but I haven't used it in forever. Elementary OS, I downloaded that and got it to work. So there's 135 distros and 3 that it doesn't work on. It still uses PAServer and requires SDK and package installations and setup. There's the list of the 134 tested distros from that website. So a lot of them there. You can look real quick. I don't know if you see your favorite distro on there. Maybe not. There's a lot there. Did not know of a lot of these distros. That's kind of the rule about Linux distros is everybody's made their own. And once you've tested all the Linux distros, there's now twice as many that you need to test on. So it's a never-ending struggle to find and test all the distros. These are the Linux distros that I've personally tested on and found to work. Most of these are not on the list of the 134 on the page you just saw. Elementary OS, like I mentioned, was listed as one that doesn't work. It worked fine for me. Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8 just barely came out a couple weeks ago. Anyway, so there's quite a few there. These probably makes the total 130, I don't know, maybe 140 at this point. I don't know, something like that. Quite a few. I will show you some of these different distros working. There's a few subtle differences. Generally speaking, you need to figure out if they're using RPMs, Red Hat packages, or Debian packages, and that's kind of going to determine how you configure it. And you want to make sure you install the right dev packages. Again, once you only need to install the dev packages once, though, so it might be a good idea to have Red Hat and Ubuntu. They're kind of the two mainstays, if you will. Use those for development, and then have all the other ones, and you don't need to install the dev tools and other ones if you're only deploying for test on those platforms. You only need to import those SDK packages once, and then you can test across all the different Linux distros. Installation. Go into GetIt, type FMX Linux. You'll see two options, FMX Linux samples and FMX Linux. FMX Linux samples, you see a list of the samples that are included there. They're installed in your samples folder, and FMX Linux is installed in your catalog or project directory. You don't really need to know that. I just thought I would include that there because that's kind of the behind the scenes minutia that I always find interesting, is where things are at. You'll notice there's two folders there. There's the source folder and the source patched folder. The source folder is the new libraries that came with FMX Linux. Source patched is a modified version of FireMonkey. So it's the existing FireMonkey, but then modified. As far as setting up with Ubuntu 18.04 Bionic Beaver, you want to use apt-get, update, upgrade, and do a dist upgrade. Then you want to install the dev packages. Really, the main thing you need is build essential. wget is usually already installed, but it's really useful, and I use it when I'm installing PAServer, so that's why I include that. And 7-zip is what you use right here to decompress PAServer. Once you're finished, this is just kind of general cleanup stuff here. It cleans up any packages that are no longer being used. You previously had dependencies requiring them, and now they don't, for example. For Red Hat, this is for Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8, which is technically newer than what's officially supported, but I've tested it. It seems to work for me. There's the details. One thing that's interesting about Red Hat is it does require you have a Red Hat account. So you have to go sign up for Red Hat to download it. And then in order to use Yum to update, you again have to have your Red Hat account. Details on how to set it up are in that second link there that says install RHEL 8. Once you've finished, do the update. You have to connect it. You do the registration there. That's where you need your account, which connects it to your Red Hat account so that you can install updates. Install the dev packages, and you also need to modify the firewall. Red Hat by default has the firewall on, where most Debian-based OSs have the firewall off. I'm sure there's exceptions to that, but that's been my experience and what I've read as well. So you turn off, or you open port 64211, which is the default port that PAServer uses. If you want to put PAServer on a different port, change the number. So installing PAServer. PAServer is what connects your IDE to the Linux platform. You can copy it from your Windows install or download it. There's the full instructions are there. I prefer to download it. I have this little script in a text document. I just paste it into my virtual machine and it gets up and running. By the way, this is a little aside. There's a OpenVM tools that's a package that's available now that is, if you're installing into virtual machine, that you don't need to install the virtual machine tools anymore. You should use OpenVM tools that's available via most package managers, and your clipboard then works. You can copy and paste between your host OS and the virtual OS. But that's kind of an aside. Anyway, once you're ready to go, though, you run the install PAServer. This downloads it using wget, downloads it from the web, extracts it. Then what we actually do is remove the downloaded gzip file, and we rename it from the 20 to just PAServer, because that's the folder it's going to install your scratch directory in, and then we run PAServer. So that takes us to using FMX Linux. You got Linux installed, and we're going to talk about how you use it and also how to set up your IDE with the FireMonkey or with the Linux SDKs. So to use it, you create a new FireMonkey application or take an existing FireMonkey application and you right-click on the project file. And you'll have an option in there that says Add Linux Platform. If that option is not there, then maybe it's you don't have FMX Linux installed, or it might be a VCL project, I suppose, or it might already be installed. So those are the things to check. Once you click add Linux project platform. If it's a new project or unsaved, it'll prompt you to save it because you have to save it first. And then it will go in and add that to the project file so that Linux is now an option. If you delete Linux as a supported platform, you can add it back in at this point because it's already been modified as a potential platform. You'll also want to make sure that your Linux platform connection and SDKs are set up correctly in order to build and deploy. So to set up a connection profile, you just go Tools, Options, Deployment, Connection Profile Manager, add, provide the information there, and it creates a connection. So that tells it how to connect to PAServer. So you have to have PAServer running on your target Linux machine in order to set up the connection. There's the dialogues on the wizard that pops up that you can walk through. Then you need to set up the SDK Manager. You go in here and set add, and you're going to specify the platform you're adding a connection manager for, so Linux. Then you specify which connection you're using, and it'll give you a list of SDKs that are available on that platform you want to import. Usually there's just one option, but if there's more than one, you can specify a previous one. If you want to go back a version, it always selects the most recent version. And you're going to wait while the SDK imports. There's the dialog that pops up when you're filling out, and then I frequently will get this message that pops up that says, file already exists. I've always said yes to all, but you could say no to all, I guess. I'm not sure what the difference is. Like I said, I've always said yes to all. Basically what happens there is that it's going through and looking for different files in different locations, and some files exist in multiple locations, and it's just copying it twice. So it's not overwriting anything in your system. It's only files. It's overwriting a file that is part of the SDK being imported. You're going to see a log down at the bottom there. Pay attention to that. If you get missing folders in the log or other sorts of errors, it might indicate you didn't install the dev packages correctly, and so you're going to go back into Linux and do that. Or it might mean that your Linux distro has files in a different location, or it's a newer version than it's previously supported. So there's a few things that you might need to do to fix that. So that brings us to troubleshooting. There are multiple default SDK paths folders, and they're in your bin folder, or default SDK paths files in your bin folder. And each of these files specifies where it imports the stuff for the SDK. So it's a list of files and paths. If you're getting errors during build or during the import and you get like missing files or missing folders, it could be that they're in the wrong spot. So what I've done this before and it's worked. For example, if a new version of a platform comes out and the import doesn't work anymore, all you need to do is use, like, for example, the find command to figure out where that file's at. If it's not on your target system that you're trying to import the SDK from, you need to figure out how to install it. Once you've got it installed, if it's still not in the right spot, then you can modify the default SDK path file. It's just an XML file. You can go in and modify it to point to the correct location. So, for example, a new version of iOS came out that moved. I'm going to say it wrong. That's right. It used a different version of Clang, and so it moved one of the files into a different folder because it had hard-coded the version information in the previous file. All I do is go in and change that, and it fixed it. So it was a quick fix once I found the file that was missing. So this is a great option if you're wanting to work with a non-officially supported version of Linux, or if you're working with a newer updated version of Linux that maybe is not, the SDK paths have not been updated for yet. So check that out. Once you've made those changes, hit update local file cache, and it should update everything for you and work again. So I'm going to do a few demos for you now and show you how to use FMX Linux. This is a fresh install of Ubuntu 18.04, which is the current LTS. It's all updated and ready to go. I've already ran the upgrade and upgrade, but you always want to do the update before installing anything from apt-get. So now I'm going to install the package required for Delphi development. Really, the main thing is the dev essentials or the build essentials. I like to do wget, which is usually installed by default, and pzip7 or p7zip full as well. All right. And then once we're done, I like to clean up after myself. Oh, did it wrong. And sudo git. So now we need to download and install PAServer. The easiest way I found is just download it from the web. This is why I like to have wget installed. So what this does here is it just uses wget to download PAServer. Therefore, it downloads it, extracts it, removes the gzip file, and then we launch PAServer. I always do a simple password and then check my IP address. Now that I have my IP address, we can jump over into Delphi. So now I'm in Delphi. I'm going to go in here to Tools, Options, and I'm going to set up a connection. So I'll go Add, and the profile will say Ubuntu LTS, and platform is Linux, and I put the IP address in here and my password. And we hit test. Good to go. Now we go over to SDK Manager, hit add. Platform we're going to add is Linux. And we'll select the connection I just put in. I'm not sure why I get this message every time. I should just go ahead and say yes to all. And it takes a couple seconds as it goes through and imports everything. If you do get messages in the log, you probably did not install build essentials. Once I've got build essentials installed, I do not see any messages in the log. I sped that up, but it really only took a couple minutes, maybe 3, to do all of that. At that point, it's done, so I go ahead and hit save. And now we'll create a new multi-device application with Delphi. And I always go with the blank one, but you can do whichever you want. So we have to save this. So I'll just go ahead and save the default location for now. Now, if I come over here to target platforms, we don't have Linux as an option. In order to get Linux as an option, whether you're bringing in an existing FireMonkey project or making a new FireMonkey project, like I did, once you've installed FMX Linux from the GetIt package manager, you just right-click on the project and choose Add Linux Platform. And now we have Linux as a platform, and it automatically selected the default connection that I had, and it's all ready to go. So we can put some text on here. So this is an odd thing. It doesn't recognize Linux as a platform for targeting. So what you have to do is you have to change it back to Windows, and then I can add a label to it. That'll probably be changed in the future because 10.3.1 did not know FMX Linux was going to be a target when it was released. All right, and so now we'll change it to Linux platform. And so now see, I can't put any components on here because they're disabled because the packages don't recognize Linux as a platform for a FireMonkey application. But I can hit run. And if we switch back over to Ubuntu, we'll see it running. So it just pops up right here on the Linux platform, and there's our application. Isn't very interesting, doesn't do anything yet, but that's just the simple basics of launching your FMX Linux application. This is the brand new fresh install of the brand new Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8. They've changed some things around on here from previously, you have to go through a process of registering in order to run yum and provide updates. So we're going to go through this really quick here. So I have to provide my username and password for my Red Hat account. So now I can do yum repo list, yum repo list. Now update our repositories. And now we can do yum update, install all the latest updates. This was just released a few days ago, I think, or maybe last month. I can't remember, a couple weeks ago at most. So it should be mostly up to date, but there's still apparently some things that need to be updated here. 148 packages, including Firefox, which I had opened. 290 packages. Yeah, I'll fast forward this part. And now we need to install the development tools. 87 packages. And it's done. Now we'll go ahead and install PAServer, which I'll use the same process I used before on Ubuntu. And it's running. And there's my IP address. So we'll get the IP address and we'll hop over into Delphi now and import the SDK. You should be able to use, I believe, the same SDK on both because you don't have to build for a specific target platform. But if you're only installing Red Hat, this way you can see it works the same on that one. So if you go into the SDK Manager again, and we're going to add a new, actually add a new connection first to Red Hat. There's our IP address, password. Now I have to turn off the firewall on Red Hat. Forgot about that step. Okay, so I got to leave PAServer. I've already root, so I can just do the firewall commands without, for some reason, my sudo is not set up correctly. All right, I believe that should get it running. Let's jump back into Delphi and find out. So now we'll test our connection, and it works successfully. Go to SDK Manager, we're going to add, but we're applying to the new one, Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8. And so far, no log messages. It says this already exists. Let's go ahead and say yes. So I'm guessing what happens is this has an XML file that lists the locations and you import things from. So I'm guessing it's importing it from the same file from two different locations. And that's what that error message is. Because it's in two different masks. I can share where those files are too. All right, it's finished. Save, and now that's active. So this is just the one I made earlier. I just made a regular FireMonkey project and hit add Linux as target, which isn't an option now because it's already added. And we'll go ahead and run this on Red Hat. There we go. There's our FireMonkey project. Not a very interesting one, but nonetheless, it is running on Red Hat. For some reason, I can't drag it. Must be a weird thing with my VM or something. I can drag that one. Okay, so there's running on Red Hat. This is the standard FireMonkey controls demo. I'm going to go ahead and right-click on it and add Linux platform. Let me see now. It's got Linux, and I said the Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8 was the default, so that's what it's selected here. I'm going to go ahead and run this so we can just see this working a little more involved on Red Hat. I did a quick Google search, and I think the reason I was getting the error message is because I'm still running as root. So let's go ahead and quit and exit root. But then I can do, what did I install PAServer then? I installed it as root. Yeah, let me install PAServer again. So now I'm running as a user, which should eliminate that error message. So Delphi init run, you don't need to see that, but you've seen it before. So this is just the standard controls in here. You see, all the different controls we might expect to see. There's some debug message here. All the different things we would expect. Ooh, that's got nice. I love that glow. I love the animation effects that you see in FireMonkey that are available to you. Spin buttons with labels on them. Rotation, opacity. And the one thing that's cool here is this is done with live bindings. You can bind anything to anything with live bindings, which is something really cool about that. And more things. There we go. So anyway, even though I played this before, I still love playing with all these controls. Scale. Oh, I can scale that up and down. And do it in 3D even. I love it. Okay. So there we go. That was just a little more advanced in Red Hat. So I wanted to try some other Linux distros that weren't on the list of known distros, but that were yet fairly popular. Found this one, Puppy Linux, which I hadn't heard about in a long time, but is listed on DistroWatch as being fairly popular. This is their latest version, which I want to say is version 8. Yeah, Bionic Puppy 8. And we've got it installed and running here. It's got this great Bionic Puppy wallpaper going on here. And I've installed the packages, the developer packages. And let's give it a shot here. Which actually I may not need the developer packages at this point, to be honest. Should have tried it without that. But I've hit build in Delphi. I got PAServer running, and boom, there it is, pops up. Ready to go. So Puppy Linux is really super lightweight. It's kind of its own creature. They use the Puppy Package Manager instead, although it is based on, at least this edition is based on Ubuntu, I believe. So you can deploy and build apps for Puppy Linux. At this point, I'm just kind of having fun. This is another OS that was on the top of the DistroWatch. If I can get the version information on here. It's called DPin. It's really a beautiful OS. Yeah. Let's see. System information. Here we go. DPin. So this is version 15.10.2. Just installed this. Really gorgeous looking OS. It's got these great effects going on, very fast. It was a quick install. Really liked it. So I just installed it, installed PAServer, got the IP address, and it should, boom, deploys and runs. And it looks really good on here. Something I've noticed is that depending on the theme you have on the OS, and I haven't experimented with this very much, it seems to influence the way the application looks, the border and such. So very cool. And this is running on DPin, which was not listed on the site as a supported platform. So very cool. There's another one that's supported. I've installed like 8 Linux distros today just to test it out. And so far it's worked on all of them. Here are the samples that are included with FMX Linux. The cursors ones captures the desktop cursor image. Custom font shows you how to use a custom font loaded, if you provide it with your application, load it up at runtime and use it. Custom icon shows you how to change the main window icon, not font icon. The event simulates keyboard and mouse events. Font lists installed fonts. Get file icon gets the icon for a file. So like if there's a text file, you can go to that file or a graphic file, and it will get the icon that the OS, the desktop manager, is using for that application, that icon, because that icon is going to be different on every different Linux distro. GtWindow shows you how to use GTK to directly manipulate Windows. It changes the caption. Screenshot lets you take a screenshot of the desktop. Shell API uses the Shell API to open URLs and files with associated programs. And FMX Web Script shows you how to use FireMonkey to draw graphics in a web CGI bin. It's different than Broadway in that it's not displaying the entire application's UI. Instead, you're using FireMonkey to create graphics that are delivered through a standard CGI. So I wanted to run through some of the samples here, just to show you them in action. I've modified them to add a little box here, and I made the cursor bigger. But this one does is it calls the FMUX get cursor bitmap so that you can see the cursor as it changes as a timer. So you can see as my cursor changes here, it shows you what the cursor looks like. This custom font sample loads the font awesome font at runtime. That's where this glyph comes from. I've modified it to use the deployment manager to deploy the font with the executable, which is very convenient. So on this one, you're going to notice I have both of these running here now. The default icon here you see is this FMX Linux logo. This one has a custom font here, or custom icon, and that's just done by adding it into the resources, which you can see there. Now, one thing I wanted to point out, though, as well, though, is if I go into the PAServer folder, it has just the default icon here. The reason that is that's just the way it works on Linux. Now, if you want to have an icon for that or a shortcut like you would in Windows, then that is done by creating one of these files here. This is a desktop entry file, and all you need to do is specify the location of the binary and the location of the icon and set it to execute. And now this, I'll go ahead and close this guy down, launches that. So this is a text file that's like a shortcut on Windows. This icon is different than that icon. You can certainly make it the same icon. That would be consistent. And then if you copy this into the right folder on your computer on Linux, then it shows up in the application list, which isn't there now. This one's kind of cool. It uses, I'll let you look at the code if you're interested in, but you can use these keys on the keyboard to simulate events. So if I hit the A, then that is as if the mouse just moved over this. So that little dot there shows where the mouse went to. So it simulated that. See that? So now it moved it down and clicked the button. It's clicking the button as I hit the key on the keyboard. So something to take a look at there. This one will get a list of all the fonts that are installed in the system, which we scroll on here, and we'll see Font Awesome is not installed. We were using in the custom font sample. This one will take a screenshot of the whole screen. So I'm going to move this over here so it's a little more obvious what's going on. So see, it's got a screenshot of the whole screen. But if I move it up here, we'll see now that's in the screenshot. There we go. That's the excitement. This one shows how you can open a URL through programmatically. It uses the Shell API, and we can also open a file. Oh. So we'll open up a PNG, and it opens up an image viewer. This one's not very interesting to see it ran, but what's going on is it's dynamically linking to this method call in this other library and using that to set the window caption. So just to show a different way you can access APIs directly. It was a simple little media player I created. Behind the scenes, the FMX Linux media player uses VLC, which most users already have installed. If they don't, it'll prompt them for it. So we're going to go ahead and load up a little video file. Just going to play. I also used the style book to show how you can use the custom styles to make it look sharp. This is my favorite style, transparent. And there's playing a little video for us. So that's people email me specifically about how Broadway works. It's part of GTK3. It's called Broadway. It lets you take a regular application and display it in a web browser. So in order to use this, I have the controls demo already deployed here. This is unmodified, just its original FireMonkey controls demo, and it's had the Linux platform added, and that's it. There's no other modifications made to it. Now, to use this with Broadway, all I need you to do is start the Broadway server. Okay, so that's listening on the socket. There's information here how you can change what port number it's on. 8080 is the default. Now I need to launch the controls demo into Broadway. So if I go to, there's nothing here now. It says Broadway 2.0, but there's nothing there. So now if I come here and I'm going to do this, controls demo. So the GTK backend Broadway is what tells it to launch the controls demo and load it into Broadway. Okay. And so now we have it running here in the browser, and I could access this from any browser. Now, one thing I want to point out is that as soon as I haven't tried it this way, but as soon as I open another tab and go to there, this one's been disconnected. Okay. But if I, let's say I go to the tree view list view tab and then come back here and hit reload, it used the same state. Okay. So that's kind of the key, is there only one user can be connected at a time, and the state is maintained within the application. So if you wanted to have multiple users connecting, you'd have to have multiple instances running. So there you go. That's really all there is to it. It's pretty straightforward. You can find more information on the GNOME website. A few notes on some of the samples. In the custom font sample, your font file, in this case, font.awesome.web or -webfont.ttf, has to be deployed with the application, or at least local to the application for it to be loaded. So you could download it from the web or somehow otherwise deploy it. This is a good opportunity to use the Deployment Manager, which I don't think it uses by default. I added this in here, so you can just add it to Deployment Manager. Also a note, you might see this on some of the samples, is occasionally you'll see a reference to libfmux.so, maybe a warning during compiling. It's an artifact from previous architecture where this was dynamically linked instead of statically linked. It's statically linked now, so you don't have to worry about it. In the future, you might see the samples cleaned up, but today you might see that. In the GtWindow sample, I received an error during linking because it dynamically links during early bound. It's an early bound dynamic link, and it wasn't finding it correctly for linking it, and so I was getting the error you see there. So you might get an error, something like that. If you do, the solution is I had to update the package that was installed. So I installed libgtk3dev and then updated the local file cache in the SDK Manager, and that fixed it, and it ran just fine. So if you do run into that error, that's the solution. And this might be more broader in that if you do run into other errors, that's something you might consider, is that you're missing a file or you need to update a file. So something to think about. In the custom icon sample, the icon file is a PNG that's loaded as a resource. So go to Project, Resources, and Images, and you can see it defined there. You also need to include the resource file in the DPR file. Make sure it's included there. If you don't have that there, then it won't be there, and it won't work. Now, you'll notice that even with that one, the icon file is just the standard default blank icon of the binary itself. That's the way it works on Linux. No Linux applications have an icon embedded in them that gets displayed by the window manager. If you want to add an icon or a shortcut to it, if you will, like a Windows shortcut, that's called a desktop entry. And it's used by both GNOME, GDK, and probably some other ones as well. It's a .desktop file, and you have to add execute permissions to the file. And if you want to show up in the applications list when the user clicks on applications and gets a list of applications installed on the computer, you can copy either to the local share applications, which is specific to the user, or user share applications, which is specific to the system, which seems reversed there, but the tilde means in your home folder, whereas /user means it's for everybody. So you have to do sudo if you want to move into that folder there. And there's an example of what that might look like, your desktop file. So you create, if your application was myCoolApp, you would have myCoolApp.desktop. This would be the contents of it there. And you would give it a name, which is the name that's displayed in there. The comment might be displayed, or a description. There's a full spec down in the corner. You can check it out. Could be displayed at different situations there. Then you have a path to the binary file. So this is a shortcut. So they tap on that or click on the, when it shows up in the applications, or if you put it on the desktop or something like that, click on it and it launches your executable, your binary, but displays that icon and that name that you specify there. So the icon can be either SVG or PNG. There's actually a few other types that are in the spec, but they're not supported by most platforms. So stick with PNG or SVG. They're great file formats. Don't know why you'd want to use anything else. ICOs are deprecated. Anyway, that's all there is to it. You can check out more information at the links there for the spec. If you want to use the FireMonkey media player, you have to install VLC. If your application runs without VLC installed, as soon as you try and play it, you'll get a message pop that says, hey, you need to install VLC. There's how you can install it with Fedora, CentOS, Red Hat Enterprise Linux 7, and Ubuntu or Debian. It's going to vary from distro to distro. So if your distro is not listed here, which, for example, Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8 that just came out is not listed here, you're going to have to find out how to install VLC there. It could be in the software package manager, or some other solution might be much more straightforward in newer distros. So there's two options on how you can use FMX Linux for the web. The first is to use it to generate web server graphics. And so this is not you're not building a GUI in the IDE that's being displayed to the user in the browser. Instead, you're using the FireMonkey libraries inside of a CGI bin to generate graphics, PNG files, or effects. So it could be grabbing a image from somewhere and applying an effect to it. It could be building a graphic from scratch, etc. So you need to install those dependencies you see there, and there's more information in that blog post. It's also in one of the samples. Basically, you build a standard console CGI bin application and install it into Apache, and it spits out graphics. Broadway is something that people are pretty excited about. Broadway gives you the ability to build a GUI, user interface, and then have that interface displayed in the browser over the web. So you can run this on a server, someone can connect, and they then receive they interact with the application as if it was running on their machine, but instead it's running on a server through the web. This is a feature of GTK. It's part of the GTK Plus. It's called Broadway. There's a link down at the bottom for more information. There's two things you have to do to make this work. So you build your application like normal for FMX Linux. First thing you do is you run the Broadway server, which is Broadway D. And then another terminal window, you're going to say GTK backend equals Broadway, and then the path to your application that you've created, the FireMonkey FMX Linux application. Once you've done that, then you can go into any browser and type the IP address of the Linux box, /8080, port 8080, and it will open up and be there. Now, the limitation is only one user can be connected to it at a time because it's actually rendering that application. That application is the state that's going on. Now, if you wanted to serve multiple users, you would need to come up with a system where you would spin up multiple instances of the application on different ports. You can check out more information there at gnome.org GTK-Broadway. Third-party libraries. This is the third-party libraries that are currently supporting it that I'm aware of. Some big, great libraries in here: Schema, TMS, Wall-to-Wall. A lot of the big players are in here already. Generally speaking, if the FireMonkey library is developed in a platform agnostic way, if it uses the RTL and FireMonkey stuff and does not make API calls specific to a certain platform, right? So if someone develops something and it makes API calls on Android and iOS, it's not going to work on Linux because it can't make those API calls. But if it's not making those calls, then it should work just fine on Linux. So it's really going to be a matter of testing it. If there's a third-party component vendor that you want to work with that's not here, certainly contact them and they can test their stuff, or maybe you can test it and find out. And if there's an issue, let them know. If it works, let them know, and they can put it up on their website and say, hey, it works with FireMonkey, FMX Linux. Likewise, if you have in-house developed FireMonkey components, they should work if they're, again, developed in a platform agnostic way, embracing the FireMonkey philosophy, if you will. And that brings us to our Q&A. So if you have any questions, hopefully you've put them in the question panel there in GoToWebinar, and we'll answer them now in a live session where I'll read through the questions and provide you with answers. If you're watching the replay, then hop over to our forums, community.embarcadero.com. Actually, I guess it's changed now. It's community.idera.com/developer-tools, where you can post your questions and find someone else to provide you with answers.
Okay, thank you everybody for joining me for this webinar. I just put the slides, a copy of the slide deck in as a PDF on the handout section, so you can grab those and download them. Let me know if you have trouble getting those. Occasionally, I know that GoToWebinar doesn't do those correctly. Marco's on the line with me as well to help answering with the questions here, which I appreciate.
Yeah, and I can also ask you the questions there of your reference. So one of the questions from Laszlo, if we can use Broadway instead.
Yeah, so I didn't test that, but Broadway is, I know that Broadway can run on a server without a Windows Manager, but if you run, I know that if you run a FMX Linux application normally on without having a Windows Manager running, it will fail. It'll give you an error message. But since Broadway will run without a window manager, it's designed, you can run it right from a server. I believe it should work. I haven't not tested it, but I believe it probably would work. It would just be on your 127.0.0.1 and then whatever port you have Broadway running on. So yeah, it should work. And you could do that instead of using the Windows, the X window server, like X410, like I was using. So yeah, interesting idea. I didn't test it, but I believe it should work.
Okay, yeah, there was another question about networking, and I think you showed that, yeah, the machine is on the same local host IP address.
Yeah, and interestingly, I tested when Windows Subsystem for Linux, not when it first came out, but when we launched our Linux support, I actually tested it, and I could not get the PAServer, the ID to bind to the PAServer. But I was reading that they've actually improved the networking a lot since then. So if you did test this before and it didn't work, it is working now. So yeah, they've improved.
Yeah, there was also a bug at the very beginning where the GDB wasn't working on the Windows Linux subsystem. That was a Microsoft limitation when it was first released, but I think Microsoft addressed it and now has debugging support, because that's critical for PAServer to even start working. So.
Yep. Yeah. When I went down this path, I was like, well, at least we'll figure out how to run, or if you can run Delphi apps on there. Because like I said, I've done this before and I couldn't connect to debug, PAServer to debug, but now it's all working and it was working really fast.
Okay, now we have two separate people asking if RAD server can be executed in the Windows Linux subsystem.
So I did not test that, but I see no reason why it wouldn't. It certainly seems that it should. Now, one note is the WSL1, which is what's the current release, is an emulation layer. WSL2, which is in Insider Preview, is a full Linux kernel. So Microsoft, they went out and grabbed the stable Windows kernel and made their own implementation of it. They made some changes to it so that it works in the Windows subsystem for Linux. And so now WSL2 is a full Linux kernel. So everything should work on WSL2, is what they're saying. So
yeah,
most likely.
Yeah. I think running RAD server as standalone, which is in the HTTP server, should work. Integrating with Apache might end up being a little more tricky, given like if you can use port 80 because there is IAS and port 80, I mean, you can really get into some trouble possibly. But for the standalone server, which is now the drawback is that if you also want to run Interbase on that machine, I think I've seen bug reports about running Interbase on the Windows Linux subsystem. So that might be technically an issue if you want to get RAD server.
Yeah, would be interesting to look at those and try them because, like I said, they've made a lot of changes, and then it should be even better now that WSL2 is out or coming out. So. Yeah, if it didn't work before, it may work now, and if it doesn't work now, it should work with WSL2.
Yeah, most likely that would become much easier also to run Interbase on the subsystem via the new version.
Now, one thing that's interesting about WSL2 is there's the video, the deep dive into WSL2, in the Q&A section at the end, they talk about this. If you're on Windows 10 and you're running like VMware or VirtualBox, you have to disable hypervisor because it's not compatible. But apparently WSL2 will use the hypervisor, so you have to re-enable the hypervisor for WSL2 to work. But they said that they are working with like the Android debugger, the x86 Android debugger that Intel put out, and to make it compatible with the hypervisor, and they're also trying to work with VMware and VirtualBox. They didn't say any timelines or any of that stuff, but hopefully that will be fixed so that these will all work with hypervisor, because it sounds like WSL2 will require that you enable the hypervisor, which may be a compatibility issue there. So that's something that you'll need to watch out for.
Okay. There is another question, is whether you can run VCL-based applications.
So VCL is Windows specific, but there is CrossVCL. I did not test this with CrossVCL because CrossVCL lets you run, take your VCL applications and target them to Mac OS and Linux. If you go to crossvcl.com, you can check that out. In theory, you could work on there, but I don't know. Didn't test it. So give it a shot. I expect it probably should work. If it, like I said, it doesn't work now, it'll probably work in WSL2.
Okay. And I don't see any other question open right now. So if there's anything else you want to ask, just feel free to.
Paul put a comment here. It says, I have VirtualBox and no hypervisor and WSL working. So yeah, if you, with WSL1 doesn't use hypervisor. WSL2, which is on the insider build, you have to manually enable it, will require hypervisor. So that's where you might get the compatibility issue with VirtualBox. As far as when will WSL2 be released, I don't know if they gave specifics on it. If you check out that deep dive video, they talk about, I think they do talk about it some in there, but I think they're only talked about when it would be available in the insider release. You could check out the command line blog, though. That's the link's up there on the screen, aka MSCLI blog, and there may be details about release plans on that. But right now it's only on the insider build, so it's probably going to depend on how the feedback on that goes. Any chance have Android running under WSL? Trying to think. I don't know. It would be x86 Android, which libhoudini would make compatible. So if it was a recent Android,
Yeah, it sounds tricky.
in theory maybe, because Android is based on Linux and you can make your own Linux distro to put on WSL. So I don't know, give it a shot. Let me know if you get it working. I would love to hear about it. Let's see.
There's another question about asking for a new webinar on using RAStudio on Windows Linux subsystem and also RAD server with Docker. Now, for RAD server with Docker, that's something we are considering, and it's on our roadmap and something we're working on. So stay tuned for that. Honestly, running RAStudio on Windows Linux subsystem, it's kind of, I mean, if you want to do Windows testing, just, well, use the Windows version. I don't see a very big, push for that. When you're targeting FireMonkey or a console app, then I think it makes more sense because you want to. The console app is an easy way to simulate without a separate machine. The UI, it's different. I mean, it's not the same as a Windows application by any stretch. The UI rendering and how it looks, so it's very nice and handy. RAD server, which is fairly complex to set up and configure, at that point, either a Docker image or a VM probably make more sense, but we can certainly investigate.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. I mean, the Windows subsystem for Linux, I mean, it should. It'd be something that might be tested, just because there's lots of moving parts to it. But it seems like it should work, and it certainly is a lighter weight solution. There's a question here about hardware system requirements to have a smooth experience like mine. So interestingly, in a VM, so this is a major plus for WSL versus a VM. In a VM, you say this virtual machine has two processor cores and 2 megs or 4 megs of memory or whatever you're going to assign to it, and that gets partitioned and set aside for that VM. With WSL, that doesn't happen. Even with WSL2, that won't happen. So depending on where you're using the memory at, your system will just allocate the memory to either Windows or WSL. So the advantage to that, I mean, that the whole purpose of the paging file, right, is you could use most of your memory in WSL, then go over to the Windows side and would just read it back from the page file and then be using the memory over there. So it should work on a much more modest set of hardware than a VM would require. Now, if you're doing heavy things on both sides at the same time, then yeah, you're going to need to have more RAM. But it's nice that it's flexible in that regard. So I don't have any minimum hardware requirements. You might check the WSL docs and see if they have anything in there. Generally, I mean, just get a good system with lots of RAM and an SSD. I mean, that's just kind of general having a good developer machine.
Okay, there's another recommendation of using VCX I cannot read it. VCX server rather than the Xming for the X11 server for Windows.
Okay, yeah.
Might be worth noticing.
Thank you for that. I tried one a while ago and didn't have any luck with it, and then like I said, I bought the X410. I was like, well, maybe this one will be easier. I know which one I tried before, and then it was still like it felt like the documentation was way too complicated. It's like, I just want this to work. And so that's why I tried to distill that down in here, hopefully, on this is what you need to do to get started with it. So yeah, I guess VCXSRV would be the one to try next if you don't want to buy the other one. The X410 is normally like $50, but it's on sale for $10 right now. Let's see, what's this? A Raspberry Pi? I've running Raspberry Pi apps. So if the Raspberry Pi app is designed for the ARM Linux, then it won't run on x86 Linux. But if it's a in source code and can recompile, which a lot of them can, then yeah, it should work just fine in here, I would expect, unless it's trying to talk to the GPIOs or something like that. So it depends on the specifics of the app. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us, and thanks Marco for helping out with the questions here. Appreciate it.
No problem. It was a very nice topic, so I wanted to attend anyway.
Oh yeah, I'm pretty excited about this. The speed at which it can spin up and spin down. I mean, there's not really a spin up and spin down. It's like on and off, you know. So it was just, I'm really pleased with that. It's much better than in my mind than in VM. Using VMs or an external machine. So I will continue to use this for my Linux, and yeah. And actually the WSL1 probably would work in a virtual machine. So if you're on a Mac computer with a Windows virtual machine, you could probably run WSL1 in the virtual machine, interestingly, because it's not actually virtualized. So Miguel's asking again about hardware requirements. I don't know. I'm not even sure what my system is RAM-wise. I would say anymore you want to have 16 gigs of RAM probably on your computer. That's just like kind of standard. And then a recent i7 processor, or actually the new AMD processors are like amazing. So or fairly recent processor that's, you know, not, you definitely don't want to go with like the budget end processors for sure. You know, the i5s, I guess they are now, are the low end ones. So you'd want an i7 or an i9, or, and I can't remember the indicator on the AMD side for what the higher end ones are, but you'd want to, you know, a fairly recent generation mid to high range processor, and at least I would say 16 gigs of RAM and an SSD. SSDs, so I heard it's official, SSDs are now cheaper than magnetic drives for moderate sizes. If you're wanting a big size, then magnetic drives are still cheaper, but for, you know, the 500 gigs to a terabyte, it's cheaper for an SSD than it is for a magnetic drive. So if you don't have an SSD, get an SSD. But that should get you going, Miguel. All right. Fantastic. Thank you so much, everybody. Oh, in the handout, there is a link to the blog post. The blog post is not live yet. I will be putting some more stuff in there shortly, and then getting it published later today. So the link is in the handout of the slides, but the blog post is not live yet. Okay. Running WSL along with RAD Studio hits the system performance. Yeah, so if you're running into performance issues, you might need to add more RAM. I mean, you look at your system, right? Your resource monitor, see if it's, you know, what's high. Is it RAM's high? Is it CPU utilization's high? And whatever is high is what you need to fix. It could be SSD as well. You know, if you're reading and writing, if you got an old magnetic drive, right? SSD is way faster. It's amazing how big a performance boost that can give you. So good luck with that. All right. Thanks so much, everybody. And I will talk to you later. Take care.
Bye-bye.